Hi, I'm Russ Weninger. I'm a wills and estate planning lawyer in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Today I'm going to discuss what you should consider in picking an executor. If you are married or live in common law, your spouse or partner should likely be a beneficiary, perhaps the sole beneficiary of your estate. And if that's the case, your spouse is a likely candidate for the executor role. There are some situations in which a spouse won't be a good choice for executor, but those situations I think are rare. If you are estranged from your spouse, or if your spouse lacks the mental capacity to act as executor, then obviously the executor role isn't appropriate. For a marriage later in life, a person may pick an adult child from a previous relationship for the executor role rather than choosing the new spouse. But typically, the spouse should be first in line for the executor role. If you have an adult child, that person should also be considered for the executor role, or perhaps be listed as an alternate executor after your spouse. Sometimes a person may want to hold off on appointing an adult child as executor, perhaps waiting until the adult child reaches some ideal level of maturity. This is not always a mistake, but it is often a mistake. Choosing a geriatric parent or sibling as executor over an adult child rarely makes sense. If your adult child is going to be the beneficiary of your estate, it usually makes sense to avoid the middleman and appoint your child as the executor. Unless your child lacks capacity to handle the estate administration, choosing another executor, such as a sibling, will typically only serve the purpose of engendering resentment in that child. One of the main reasons it makes sense to appoint a spouse or adult child as an executor is that these people are likely beneficiaries of your estate. Unless you have minor children who may need a third-party executor to safeguard their financial interests, it usually makes sense to choose an executor from among the beneficiaries. An executor who lacks a connection to your estate as a beneficiary is less inclined to want to assume the role and has less incentive to do the best job possible. While you may consider it an honor to be appointing someone as the executor of your estate, the person you have appointed likely considers it a nuisance unless that person is also a beneficiary. An executor doesn't have to be a financial whiz, nor does an executor have to have any legal training. Any mentally competent adult could potentially assume the role. Minors lack legal capacity to administer estates and should not be chosen as executors. Someone who is suffering from dementia or who suffers from a severe mental disability or illness will not be a good choice. Someone with a gambling problem or a debilitating drug addiction or a tendency to hit up family members for money will probably not be a good choice. An executor should typically not be too old or too young. Unless you are yourself quite young and your parents are still reasonably young and healthy, it probably doesn't make sense to appoint your parents as executors, as they will likely predecease you. In some cases, it may make sense to appoint a younger sibling, but if you are yourself advanced in years, it likely doesn't make sense to appoint an older sibling. People who have prepared wills when their children were minors will often revise their wills once their children have reached their mid-20s. At that point, appointing their children as executors or alternate executors. Other things being equal, the executor who lives near you and your assets is preferable to the executor who lives far from you and your assets. Administering an estate from afar can be a daunting task. If your candidate for executor will have difficulty legally entering Canada, then they may not be the best choice. Having an executor who is fluent in English is certainly desirable if your estate is in Canada and outside of the province of Quebec. Immigrant families sometimes end up picking different executors out of necessity. While a young Canadian couple would typically choose siblings as alternate executors, a young immigrant couple may end up choosing friends or neighbors rather than overseas siblings. Please check out my upcoming video in which I will talk about how to pick a guardian. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like it or share it or subscribe to my channel. If you have a question, please leave it in the comments section and I will do my best to respond. While I don't want to give specific legal advice in the comments section, I will try my best to answer general questions, provided it is understood that my responses to comments should not be taken as legal advice, that social media interactions are not considered lawyer-client interactions, and that your safest course of action is to consult directly with me or another lawyer if you have a legal issue or would like to prepare a will. Thank you.